Welcome to GS Podcast number 98. I'm Stephen Knight. I will be your trusty host for today's episode, which is brought to you by Audible. Audible is the place to go if you want an audio book. Maybe you want to revisit a timeless classic, discover a new favourite. I've been using it a lot recently. I'm double dipping really in terms of books because I've discovered this thing called WhisperSync where you can get into a book on your Kindle, an e-version of that book, and you can put that down, and then as soon as you're somewhere where you've got some free time but you're not able to stare at a book, like the gym, or if you're going for a walk, or if you're driving, you can pipe in the audiobook and it carries on from exactly where you left off on your Kindle. And when you finish with the audiobook and you want to return to the Kindle version, it carries on from where you last listened. I'm flying through books because for somebody who spends a bit of time interviewing authors, that's really helpful. I can cram as much in as quickly as possible. I also find, you'll have to let me know if you experience this, but if I'm listening to information, I tend to absorb it a lot better than I do the written word. I don't know if that says more about my general level of reading comprehension and intelligence, or whether there is some sort of psychological underpinning to this, so let me know. But my main point is, if you want a free audiobook and a free 30-day membership, which is a trial, you can get one by visiting audibletrial.com/GS. You get to keep the audiobook forever, and you can cancel the subscription if for some incredible reason you don't find any value in it. But it also helps to support this fine show too. I imagine pretty much all of you would have seen the horrendous news coming out of my home city of Manchester this last week. I have plenty to say about that, but I think it's best saved for an upcoming episode of Taking the Myth, which I'm due to record with Iram Ramzan. We're both fellow Mancunians, so I imagine we'll have a lot to say about that. What I will say now is I put out a charitable fundraising page for the Manchester Emergency Relief Fund, and this was being organised by the Red Cross. And I'm absolutely blown away by how many people have contributed. I put a limit of, I put a target, an original target of £500. We're now at 2,305. So thank you so much to all the people who've chipped in and contributed there. It's really important, and it means a lot that so many people from all areas of the planet have chipped in and shown solidarity with the people of Manchester. So if you head over to my Twitter timeline at gspellchecker, you'll find a pinned tweet there with a link and instructions how you can chip in as well. Dr. James Lindsay returns for this episode. James is a super smart guy, very, very nice as well. We're going to be talking about the mischief, the shenanigans, the controversy that in cahoots with Peter Boghossian they've managed to stir. They've both released a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, and the paper's titled "The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct." Now, the idea behind this was that it was a hoax, and when it first landed, that's how it appeared to me. I found it hilarious. The idea is that they're sort of exposing the postmodernism that's apparent in certain areas of studies. And it seemed like they'd done that at first. The dust has settled on it a little bit, and there's been a lot of criticism, some of it hysterical, charges of transphobia and sexism and, various other isms. And there's been some quite objective responses to it as well. So I've put a lot of the criticism to James on this episode. He's provided his answers as honestly as he can, so it's up to you to make your mind up on the significance of this paper in the grander scheme of things. I'm sure we'll know more when the dust settles even more. So if you've got any follow-up questions, feel free to send them on Twitter. You can reply in the comments section of the blog as well, and I'm sure James will see those as well. You can keep up to date on the podcast at gspellchecker.com. Enjoy.
There's a word that some folks find real hard to spell. Ain't it horrible for me, except after seeing who cared to go burn in hell? But then along came a man, his spell took across the God of Creed, and he set out upon a noble quest to help those that don't know what it means. And he said, go A-T-H-E-I-S-T, and don't you put that I before that E. A-T-H-E-I-S-T, don't mean we're done.
it's a great pleasure to welcome Dr. James Lindsay back to the Godless Spell Checker podcast. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. I'm very well, thank you. It's incredibly sunny in Manchester at the moment, which is makes me suspicious.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, it's fairly terrible weather here, so
good.
That makes me not suspicious.
So it's been a busy few weeks for you. Is that fair to say?
It's been a very busy week. Is accurate.
Okay.
I mean, I'm busy generally, but this week has been particularly especially busy.
So you and Peter Boghossian, friend of the podcast, great guy, you two have co-authored a paper that's got a lot of attention at the moment, and it's being compared to the Sokal hoax, I think sometimes known as the Sokol affair. Maybe you could just explain to my listeners what that is before we touch on the specifics of what you've been working on.
I think I can give a fair overview, but I don't, I'm not an expert in the affair itself. I was aware of it before having acted. I have read Fashionable Nonsense, which was his book with Jim Bookmont. I can't say names in French, so Jim Berkmont or Brickmont. Unfortunately, I did not take French in high school. But I read the book on a trans-Pacific flight, so retention is what it is when you are locked in an airplane for 14 hours. But I was aware of his hoax beforehand. So the history, roughly, to the best of my knowledge, is that there was this rise in postmodern commentary in social theory coming out throughout the 90s, following certain French philosophers, and their journals were becoming increasingly laden with certain political biases and with misuses of language that looked like academic puffery and, as they titled their book, fashionable nonsense. And in particular, there were also certain abuses coming from these people where they were taking mathematical and scientific terms and, to use this word, appropriating them. They were using them out of context in order to add weight and an appearance of rigor to social commentary.
Sounds very Deepak Chopra at the moment.
It is a bit that way. And so Alan Sokal is a physicist. I'm probably mispronouncing his name as well, and my apologies. But he was a physicist working with NYU, and he submitted a paper to the foremost, I think by Duke University Press is who published it, foremost social commentary journal at the time, called Social Text, which the editors, there was no peer review at Social Text at the time. The editors saw his name, the gravitas of a scientist. They saw that he was writing a paper that claimed that quantum gravity is not best thought of as a scientific model, but as a social construction, and then all kinds of crazy nonsense that came from that. And he wrote it according to a certain method. From what I recall from Fashionable Nonsense, he essentially took many of these quotes from notable people, strung them together with absolute nonsense that was in the same linguistic style that they used, and wrote this rather riotous hoax that was then accepted by the board at Social Text and published. And of course, it created a controversy or an academic uproar that is still being talked about, some 2 years later. So that, I think, is a fair summary of what had happened there.
Absolutely. So maybe you could just explain what the peer review method is and why it's important and how it should be, really, and how it's used in modern science.
I'll do what I can. Mathematics, of course, has peer review, but it's a little bit different because, as we used to joke when I did my dissertation, most fields talk about having a dissertation defense, and in mathematics we call it a dissertation defense. But we all joke kind of behind the scenes that there's no defense in a mathematics dissertation defense. It's a dissertation presentation because the proofs speak for themselves. So if the proofs are accurate, then they are. But I'll see what I can do to talk about it, especially in the sciences. So peer review, the idea is that one would submit scholarship to be published in an academic journal, and then the editors of that journal will examine the paper, decide if it's superficially plausible that it will be fit for publication in the journal. And if they deem that it is, they'll forward that to a number of reviewers who are experts in the field or other people with relevant expertise, who will then read the paper in detail as much as they're supposed to read it in great detail, and then evaluate the weight of the arguments, look for shortcomings, and then pass decisions as to whether or not the paper is legitimately qualified as worthwhile research in that field. They'll then forward corrective comments and suggestions, or if it's outright criticism and rejection, they'll then forward that to the editor, who will summarize it, send it back to the authors of the paper, who are to correct their paper accordingly. And this is a back and forth editorial process. But generally what's supposed to happen is relevant experts in the field will examine the paper. They will then decide whether or not it's legitimate scholarship. And then between that process of verification and the opinions of the editors, who should be trying to run a good journal, they will then deem the paper worthy or unworthy for publication pending certain improvements. And when it's good enough, if it becomes good enough, then they'll publish it. If it does not, then they will reject it or recommend it to a different journal.
You and Peter Boghossian have worked together on this paper that has just this incredible title, which I'm happy to say out loud now: The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. That's truly wonderful. Well done on that, first of all.
Cheers.
But maybe you could tell me which particular journal you targeted for this, which specific area of study, and why you felt that you had more of a chance getting something like that through in that area of study than, say, another subject.
Right. So we targeted the field of gender studies. And of course, it's hard to say whether we were targeting the whole field or particular corners of the field. Of course, we're aiming to hit the whatever portion of gender studies is deeply infected with a philosophical idea that's known, I've come to figure out or find out, is known as radical constructivism, which is where the social construct kind of idea has so much truck. And so we thought that it would be possible to play up to the social construct idea and get this particular corner of the field to pick it up as an academic paper. And so we chose journals that we thought, well, actually we chose a journal. I chose the journal by name, not by impact, because I had almost no faith that the ridiculous paper could get published. And when I saw International Journal for Masculinity Studies, I said, well, that's as good a choice as any. Let's go. And I tried that out to see what would happen. And the story is documented on Skeptic, where they said that they did not find it suitable for publication. They gave no reasons why and offered to internally transfer it to this other journal, Cogent Social Sciences. They've now stated that that was an error, that they did not realize that their automated rejection letter contained a forwarding offer. So somewhere somebody slipped, and their official statement is that that was inadvertent, but that's how it ended up going to Cogent Social Sciences. We didn't go looking for Cogent Social Sciences. We went for looking for a journal with a name that might be friendly. And so this Cogent Social Sciences, did they put a group of reviewers on it as well? They had, the editor sent it, thought it, I guess, sufficient, and sent it to 2 blind reviewers. We don't know who those reviewers are. We don't know what their areas of expertise are. I don't think the journal has revealed who did the actual peer review. They've stated also that they chose the wrong people, that at least one or both of the reviewers did not have the relevant expertise to make a call on this paper. I don't know the internal politics of their organization or operations at their organization. All I know is what their public statement says. But it did pass peer review with rather sparse reviewer comments from 2 people that the journal at the time deemed to be sufficient experts in the field and no longer seem to think are sufficient experts in the field.
What would you say to the criticism people are saying that it's not really a very credible journal, and that's why it got published, whereas any journal that's thought of as proper and more efficient would have rejected it outright?
Well, I mean, the evidence seems to be mounting toward a reading of that being somewhat valid. As to whether or not another journal, given more time, or in my opinion, though Peter and I disagree on this point, and other people agree with Peter that I've spoken about it with, that I would have made it 25% more serious, taken out absolute contradictory, ridiculous, humorous statements that I included in there, like pre-post patriarchal society as a phrase. If I would have made this appear, a quarter more serious because of the scholarship that led us to the so-called scholarship that led us to think that a hoax would be possible, I have a fairly small amount of doubt that had we been patient enough and been a little more serious, a little less ridiculous in our approach, that publication could have been almost guaranteed. And the fact that certain people are commenting either on comments under write-ups about our piece or people leaving comments on social media, that we did indeed create a cogent argument with a compelling idea in the field, lends credence to... Yeah, so that lends credence to the belief that had we not been intentionally riotous with how we wrote this, at a minimum, it would have been accepted. Now, not to speak for him, but my understanding, which could be mistaken, is that Peter seemed until recently at least to think that the paper eventually would have been taken up by a journal in the field. And the motivating article wasn't so much any specific one of these really ridiculous ones that you see on real peer review, but rather the high profile one where feminist glaciology not only got a feminist approach to glaciers that seeks to improve human ice relations. Not only did that get published in a peer-reviewed journal, but it also received hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money to do the study. And so given evidence like that, the broad picture of evidence, I do think that if we would have been a little bit more careful with how ridiculous we were, we probably could have gotten something extremely similar. If it weren't for the amount of attention that this idea has gotten, I wouldn't be surprised at all to find papers being able to be published on the conceptual penis and the problems it creates for hypermasculine society.
Keeps me awake at night.
I know. Me too.
So let's have a general overview of gender studies. I've seen some of the lunacy that seems to come from that area of study. It's often, very closely wed with identity politics, and it's a difficult one to discuss openly without certain accusations coming your way. And then just get your opinion of it. Is this something you feel that's just a fringe element? Do you think the whole area of study is infested with this sort of identity politics? Do you think it's a valuable area of study? What's your general views on these things?
All right, so as often happens when I go on podcasts, you're about to get a complicated answer.
Excellent.
I'll start with Peter and mine. We've discussed it at length, so I feel comfortable speaking for him on this topic. It's certainly my view about gender studies overall as a concept. So conceptually, the field is ideally poised to answer certain questions that need answers. What is gender? Why is gender as it is? What is the interaction between gender and certain things that come up in society? So, for instance, is there a connection between self-assessed gender identity and HIV rates or something along these lines? There are legitimate questions related to gender in society. There are legitimate questions involving the concept of societal privilege or discrimination. There are really important topics, really interesting questions. And as a philosophical pursuit, gender studies seems to be ideally situated to do work on those questions. And it's a shame that we've gotten to the point where it's hard to tell if that's what's going on or if it's predominantly the other thing. So to answer more clearly to, is the whole thing, is it fringe? The answer is I don't know, and I don't know how to tell, and that's the problem. I don't say that a person outside of the field should be able to necessarily engage in the deep academic arguments within a field, which we've been accused of transgressing that boundary to pay homage to Sokol. His paper being called Transgressing the Boundaries. Yeah.
That was a deep reference there.
Yeah, so the thing is, though, I have a PhD. Peter is a doctorate. We are educated people. Many other people are educated people. We are intelligent people. We should be able to read something of this scholarship and not come away with this feeling that we can't tell what the good stuff is from the bad. Not a clue. And that's really a shame. So whatever degree to which the field is infected, it's concerning because it's ruining the ability for the genuine scholars who are doing important work to get their work noticed by the broader academic community. it's also poisoning the reputation of their field outside of the field. The highest impact factor, if I've read what people have sent me since correctly, unlike Trump, or like Trump, I guess I only know what's on the internet at the moment. The highest impact factor in gender studies is still rated something like number 993 in all scholarly journals. So that makes the field fairly fringe on its own, which is perhaps a shame. And for scholars outside of the field to take the field seriously, which if it's got this situation where 993rd is the best that they're doing, you know, you need to have really rigorous methods that accord with the established epistemological tools that we've developed since the Enlightenment. And it seems to be that at least a significant portion of the field is corrupted by this, what they call radical constructivist epistemology. You'll notice also from Plantinga, given this is the Godless Spell Checker show and our background in atheist type studies, Alvin Plantinga, when theological epistemologies completely lost all of their truck, came up with reformed epistemology. They came up with their own epistemology. That's how we know our stuff's true. We feel it deep inside with the what is it, the sensus divinitatis or whatever. And so they have this new epistemology for themselves. Well, the radical constructivists have their own epistemology that's based upon these postmodern ideas that have combined with Marxist ideas of reversing the bourgeoisie and proletariat relationships that exist in society. And so if they've come up with their own epistemology and they're trying to overturn other epistemologies, as some of their established epistemologies that we know as we're having a conversation digitally over Skype in real time across an ocean, something works with what we're doing. If they're trying to overturn these and their papers explicitly say that the scientific method is sexist and that it needs to be overturned, then clearly, you know, they're showing the hallmarks of religious ideology. And to whatever degree that represents the field, it is poisoning and obscuring all legitimate scholarship that the rest of the academy and the rest of society could benefit from. So it's a terrible shame.
I mean, this sort of postmodernism in papers in this way, it's practically unfalsifiable, isn't it? I think that's when you know.
Exactly.
What would you say to people who are looking at this and thinking this is, the term's been thrown around, transphobic, this idea that going for this paper and trying to discredit gender studies in this way is really an attack on trans people and their search for legitimacy and their rights and their place to identify strongly with what they are and have something to back that up?
That's preposterous, is what that is. It's insulting, and it's to human knowledge, and it's preposterous. The phenomenon of transgender issues is certainly deeply legitimate in many ways, and it deserves good answers, and in fact deserves the best answers that a combination of good philosophy and good science, be that psychological, medical, neurobiological, neuroscientific, it deserves the best answers that our combined effective techniques for getting to good answers about the world can provide. And that is the crux here. So if one cares about preserving a particular view of how the trans rights discussion has to proceed, regardless of its connection to direct reality or objective reality, then one would possibly be able to conclude on what seems to be poor epistemological grounds that we have insulted a field of very important study, which is, of course, not what we did. If, on the other hand, you believe that there are extremely important and extremely legitimate questions surrounding trans people and their rights and questions regarding what needs to be figured out to maximize their well-being, and you believe that the answers to those questions are going to be best found not by appeals to certain political, ideological views, but rather by carefully doing philosophy on well-established and well-gathered evidence that accords with the best means that we have. In other words, if you believe you're going to get better answers by being careful than by saying what you feel, then what we would be doing by encouraging a situation that might lead to cleaning up the rigor of gender studies or pulling some of this postmodern unfalsifiability, as you said, is accurately, out of it is improving the overall chances that we can get to legitimate, good answers that will maximize the future opportunity and rights of people who identify however they identify with regard to gender.
Yeah, it doesn't sound particularly transphobic in your rhetoric to me.
I mean, there's no transphobia even in the paper. There's nothing. We didn't make fun of trans people in any way. We used trans people, which means we implicitly assumed the reality of trans issues to say that there are trans people who possess a penis who do not identify as male, and we took that as good enough to be going on with. We used that as an in to make a satirical piece that satirizes language and certain moral biases and hope to make it publishable. We have no intention whatsoever of diminishing or criticizing or making fun of anything to do with trans people. Peter and I are both what you might describe as the fusion between cringe libertarian and liberal. We're definitely, as I've often worded it, we'll put it this way, I am a big fan of social justice with lowercase s and j, and that's why I don't like capital S and J social justice. I feel like it's harming the approach to legitimate gains in social justice by demanding ones based on poor epistemologies.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of them labels. I throw SJW or social justice warrior around as a pejorative quite a lot, but it does. I mean, obviously, like you just said yourself, I believe in social justice. I've seen a lot of it this last week in Manchester, people coming together and doing things, and that's what social justice is to me. But I think just calling yourself social justice and shouting racist on the internet is probably not achieving much, and that tends to be what we see a lot of representing that area. I mean, I know obviously the idiots are usually the loudest, but
let me go further than not achieving much. Not only is it unlikely to be achieving much, consider, for instance, just to have a very brief aside, that if the methods are epistemologically poor, a possible example of something similar was when you had Soviet science a la Lysenko, and you saw that is not going to say that gender study science is going to lead to mass famines because of its rejection of evolutionary biology or whatever. But I mean, the rejection of good epistemological methods can have really bad results. In this case, the goal is social justice, and if you pervert the epistemological pool where it comes to doing good research on gender. And like I said, one of the most important questions gender studies should be asking and answering is, what is gender and how does it manifest? Why is it as it is? Well, if you even want to go further than that, you can say that to all appearances, one of the largest reasons, if you actually talk to and ask conservatives, why did you vote for Trump, especially given all that's going on now? Of course, you've got the just rampant base or whatever, but if you ask other ones, you've probably seen the little cartoon with the dog and the fire all around it, and this is fine, this is fine. Well, somebody on Twitter, and I don't know who, so that's a shame, put up a variant on that where the dog's surrounded by the flames, and it says, this is more appropriate, and it says, haha, take that, liberals. And that's sort of what's going on, is that they were willing to risk Trump, which is in almost every possible regard a major, at least temporary, step backwards for social justice objectives. They were half of the voters, or nearly half the voters in the United States, were willing to risk the fallout from a Trump presidency just because and if you ask them, it is mostly just because they wanted to reject all of this craziness that's coming in terms of political correctness as they brush it, or they paint it with one brushstroke. So to go too far with questionable epistemologies doesn't just hold back social justice, it creates backlash that will work against it. And another compelling piece of thought in that line is, imagine that you create this environment of fear where thoughtful people are unwilling to speak up. Who is going to speak up about these issues? Only the lunatics. And so the people who have the most fury about it, so all of us people who regard ourselves as, sensibly on the left or in the center or sensibly on the right, If we're all afraid that we're going to be socially stigmatized for questioning the orthodoxy, the only people left to do it are going to be extremists on the far right. And that's exactly what we see has happened. We see that because they've been cowed into silence by threats and people being chased out of their jobs, say Tim Hunt, the blowback of the ESA scientist,
the shirt.
Matt, for the shirt. I mean, these kinds of things are going to silence people who will have fair and legitimate criticisms. They're going to be afraid to speak up. And what's going to happen in result is extremists are going to flood the moral vacancy with bad answers, like let's put Trump in office.
It's funny because that tag racist still, I mean, it's getting a little worn out, it's getting a little blunt around the edges, but it still carries a lot of weight to the point where good, decent people don't like the label. And it does shut them down. They will not put their head above the trenches in fear of getting that label, even though they possibly agree with some of the things that we're told we can't talk about. So you're quite right. All that does is leave the people who don't care about being called racist, who probably might be a little bit racist, to take center stage. I
mean, if you don't like the accusation that the social justice aspect of it had anything, and you maybe see the sense in it, but of course, the social justice left does not like the accusation that they had anything to do with getting Trump elected. One can easily take that aspect out, and it's very difficult to deny that one of the overwhelming reasons that people who voted for Trump was because of immigration, which is code for A, something to do with Mexican immigration in the United States, and greater than B, the B being the larger, this whole problem with Islamism creeping, freaking them out. And so Trump made a big fuss about standing up and saying radical Islamic terrorism. I'm the only one brave enough to say it. They all just lie about it. And there are tons of people who strongly supported that. So again, you have this unwillingness to speak honestly about our problems coming from the left, who they're all well-intending. I don't think these people are necessarily, I mean, some of them may be on the payroll or whatever of propaganda ministers, but for the most part, it's like, I'm a nice guy. I don't want to be the jerk. I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I understand. I'm smart enough and I'm compassionate enough to understand the nuances and the problems. And so my silence gives room for extremists to step in. So, the Obama doctrine, Hillary Clinton followed along with the similar line, was to be very cautious, and for good reasons, about branding the problem Islamic terrorism. And of course, Trump just didn't give a crap. And the fact that he would, quote unquote, speak his mind was one of the things to this day that most of his supporters loved most about him.
I hear that all the time. He says what he thinks. He tells it how it is.
People are sick of all the waffling and all of the dancing around an obvious issue. And so by abnegating the willingness to speak clearly and truthfully about concerns related to Islamic terrorism, to gender issues, and whatever else, to just take the party line of the far left and run with it completely, or to be too scared to say, wait a minute, that might go too far, opens the door to extremists on the far right who are more than happy to exploit the loophole to come in and say, look, the left is lying, the left is unwilling to be honest. I don't know. I mean, speaking to the Manchester thing, I don't know how many people I've seen on my right-wing list of people I know in real life, so I'm friends with them on Facebook, who have posted complaints that, many people have changed their avatars on social media to the Union Jack. And they say, this is the liberal response to a terrorist attack. Just put up a solidarity flag, the end. And so what that apparent vacancy there is, well, okay, that clearly isn't sufficient. What's the better answer? And the better answer is what you just attested to, is people coming together, rebuilding the community, showing that they're not afraid, helping, caring. That's the proper answer. And that's what the proper left is really doing. But symbolically, it looks like, oh, yeah, we showed a flag. We're your buddies on social media at the end. And when the right's like, you know what we could do? Go bomb them. And all of a sudden, that sounds like a course of action. And it starts to sound sensible by comparison. And that's a catastrophe. We shouldn't have zealots on one side able to exploit the silence, or the apparent silence, or not even the apparent silence, the perception that there's silence that goes with, social media activism versus real activism. I'm not saying that the people on the right that I'm seeing saying this are right. Of course, I told you, you know what the real reaction is and where the real strength is. It's what you actually attested to. And I've seen pictures of it online, and it's wonderful. The community coming together to rebuild immediately and to help. And instead, there's just this association with it being just vacant moralizing or vacant symbolism or slacktivism. And that's super unfortunate, because then they can say, well, I know something we can do. We can go turn the Middle East into a parking lot. Yeah. And people are like, well, that is an answer. It's a bad answer, but people, in the absence of other answers, they're going to take something. That's, of course, what religious psychology says about why people seek religion as a means for having a sense of control in life.
Yeah, I mean, the far right are correct in the fact that something needs to be done, something needs to be changed, and someone needs to take accountability. It's just that the solutions they have for those things are atrocious, as you've just said. But that's what happens in the absence of any sensible ideas, unfortunately. But I mean, I think I've sworn off making political predictions now. I didn't think Brexit would happen. I didn't think Trump would get in, and I also naively thought that Trump getting in would be a massive wake-up call for the left to get their shit together and regroup and look at these issues where they've lost ground and take a more sensible approach to them. But it just seems to me, from the rhetoric I'm seeing, that they've just dug in even further with their hatred and their... I mean, they've gone a step further now, and they're promoting violence, which is something I tended to fear from the far right, but I feel like I'm more likely to be assaulted by somebody on the left nowadays.
True, and I would invite you and all of your listeners to go read the paragraph that I wrote in, or Peter and I wrote in our Skeptic piece about the Festinger cult and cognitive dissonance and redoubling down into deep moral convictions after they're shown to be out of accordance with the evidence. So that's, as sad as it is, I didn't predict it either, but it should have been perfectly predictable.
Okay, well, touching back to the paper that you and Pete have put out there, there's a lot being made of the fact that, well, people are alleging that this was a paid-for paper. I think they've termed the expression vanity piece. It's something that you can just pay any old peer review journal and they'll publish anything. What is the process in terms of finance? What kind of part does money play in this kind of thing?
So again, we had a complicated answer, but I'll try to be pretty brief about it. So I'll speak to two things: to paying in peer review in general, and then in our case specifically, and I'll do that one first. Cogent claims that the money plays no role in influencing peer review, but of course, the editors pick the reviewers. So if they pick soft reviewers, knowing that they'll get paid, they can make that claim with a veneer. I'm not going to accuse Cogent of anything. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes there, but I will say that is one possible explanation for how they know that they're going to get paid at the end of the day. So if they pick soft reviewers, they're going to get paid, and if they pick hard reviewers, they might not. So that's the potential conflict of interest there. At the same time, open access journals have to make money somehow. They don't have a paywall. So if you want to go access a paper on an open access journal without a library subscription or without buying the journal outright, without paying often like $45 or $85 to read a paper online, if you wanted to do that, an open access journal gives you the option. So there's a benefit to it. But they have to make money, or at least break even somehow. So that means that there's a fundamental difference between paying to publish and that the payment to publish presents a conflict of interest. And we feel like people are being really hasty in assuming that in this case there's a conflict of interest. The evidence may bear that out, and if it does over time, and we can answer that question clearly, of course we're going to follow, Peter and I will follow the evidence. But in the meantime, it may or may not be true, and to accuse them of being a vanity journal is something that is highly plausible and yet entirely not able to be concluded. If it went to court, and if it went to court and there was a due process was involved, we wouldn't be able to. We would have to get a high standard of evidence to make an accusation of that kind and have it hold up. And we hesitate to be able to conclude that, though we admit that it may be true, and we wrote that in our Skeptic piece. Now, it's a little more complicated with pay to publish in general, not just with open access, but also that many legitimate journals also require pay to publish. It's, in fact, very common, knowing many scientists, to have science journals often require pay to publish. I suspect it's because of the grant structure in science, that they know that the papers will be paid for out of the researchers' grants, and that's how that came to be. In mathematics, one would almost never pay to publish that I'm aware of, unless it were in an open access journal. And of course, university libraries recognize that there are open access journal benefits, and so they often earmark money to pay for them too, which legitimizes the open access project, casting doubt on the assumption that the conclusion, I should say, that this particular journal is a vanity journal. If anybody can publish in this journal, I would encourage people to try. If they can publish any old poppycock, then they are helping to establish the claim that it is just a vanity journal. And that is a problem. We've drawn a lot of attention to it, more attention than hundreds of hoax papers in pay-to-publish open access science journals drew over the last couple of years. So that's wonderful for us to have done. Nobody's drawn this much attention to the problem, as far as I know. But pay-to-publish itself cannot, on its own, disqualify somebody or disqualify a journal as illegitimate. For instance, any scientist has published papers in many scientific journals that are of great repute have paid to publish. One of the scientists I know, I don't know which journal it is, but I do have a close friend who's a scientist who published a very long paper recently, and he was extraordinarily frustrated because the journal charged something like $380 or some odd like that per page to publish, which is an astonishingly high fee for a long paper.
Right. Okay. So it's a complicated mixed bag, and I think it's not uncommon for people to pay in order to get their work into these journals. Then, but the general idea is that this plays no part in whether or not it's not seen as a bribe or a sweetener. It doesn't help you get published, the monetary value.
Let me clarify that a bit. What it is that it's a problem like a bribe or a sweetener or a softener of their standards for some journals, and it's not for other journals. And on its own, you paid to publish is not a sufficient disqualifier of the journal. I don't really want to defend the journal that took this. I don't feel like it's, becoming for me to defend the journal. And if we have proved absolutely nothing by this hoax, or I'm sorry, you can't prove anything with n=1. I should be way more careful with my language. If we have drawn attention to the fact of the pay to publish journal problem, then we're glad to have exposed that and gotten so much attention to it, because it needs to be repaired to restore credibility to the peer review publishing phenomenon. At the same time, it was unavoidable because of the nature of our satire that we would also draw attention to gender studies. And as I was saying on a podcast last night that I did, I feel like people who are for the first time invited to go read or peruse the gender studies literature because of our hoax, it's highly likely that they're going to have a similar experience to people it's the first time they've ever perused the Bible, which is one of the greatest makers of atheists. To steal from Peter's manual, the manual for creating atheists was Pete's book, but really it's the Bible. Just go read the whole thing. Well, you want to become suddenly suspicious and possibly horrified of what's coming out of radical constructivist gender studies, not to speak for the rest of the field, which I don't know what proportion is which. Go read it. I mean, when you start reading things like a paper published 2 years ago in Generos that gender studies scholars consider themselves actively turning their students or I'm not sure who else to qualify, but turning people into viruses to go infect other fields with the radical constructivist epistemologies and ideology. And they compare themselves favorably to Ebola and HIV in a paper published in one of their journals. There is reason to become slightly horrified. It's not just that they're publishing gobbledygook or complete gibberish that's concerning and passing it off as scholarship. It's that there is at least to some degree, and I again don't know how much or how effective it is, some effort on the part of the radical constructivists to take over other fields and water down their epistemology by introducing this constructivist one instead, and that should be very alarming to people that care about getting good answers to our questions. Should be very concerned that there are people who are saying and trying to infect other fields with the idea that science is inherently sexist. That's not good.
Do you think there's a possibility that this says everything about one particular peer-reviewed company and nothing really about gender studies? How much of what you've achieved do you think says about the state of gender studies versus this one particular journal?
There's a few things to say about that as well. First of all, the hoax itself getting published. So that's one aspect of the hoax, that a fact that it got published. It's very difficult to parse how much it says about gender studies, how much it says about the journal itself. The evidence seems to be tipping toward, given the statements made by the journal, that there were errors made on their part, that it was lax standards, they picked the wrong reviewers. The hoax seems to be pointing more and more, and as I've said, Peter and I from the beginning have been willing to follow the evidence. We published a piece in Skeptic saying we see at least two problems, we don't know, or at least one problem with two component parts, we don't know which is more important. It looks like that this particular hoax paper was published where it was published speaks more to the journal than to gender studies. However, the fact that our hoax can be read as a satire of gender studies with real credibility behind that claim. And Richard Dawkins called it a satire of gender studies. Sam Harris, these are not fools. There are many people who have recognized that this is the paper itself that we wrote is a effective satire of the field, says something is going on in gender studies, whether our hoax being published establishes that or not. The fact that it is so similar to stuff that people who are intelligent would say, wait a minute, yes, this does ring true of what I've seen in gender studies papers, means that even though the hoax itself may point mostly at the journal, the publication of the hoax itself may point at the journal, the quality of the material and its easy identification with what's coming out of gender studies as a satire of that field, or at least the radical constructivist side of that field, points to a problem within gender studies. And people are really not being nuanced enough to understand that the publication of the hoax is one aspect of what's going on, and the content of the hoax and its similarity to the field that we claim to be lampooning is a second component of the hoax. Both present evidence consistent with problems in different places.
Okay, so I mean, it's been out for a little while now, and you've had a flavour of both sides of the fence, really. You've had a lot of people celebrating it and finding it hilarious and sharing it on, and for the reasons which you personally, I assume, would have hoped. And then you've had the flip side of the coin where people have been quite vitriolic in their dissent at what you've done. And now you've had a little chance to view these things and you've experienced it. Looking back at it, are you happy you've published this paper and you've gone forward with it? Or is it something that you think you might regret down the line?
No. Certainly happy with it. As I've said on Twitter, said to a number of people who've asked now, if all that we achieve is raising a significant amount of awareness for a pay-to-publish open access journal problem that has heretofore been attempted but not come to light at this level, then we've achieved something good. If we also have raised awareness that causes people to engage in a careful look at gender studies, either to vindicate it if it's clean, or to identify what needs to be cleaned up if it's not up to scratch, if its RIP methods are not properly rigorous, then we've also achieved something. So I certainly don't regret having done this or any part of it. I do look at the backlash and then the interpretations, of course, in a careful and sober light. But no, there's no regret here. I'm a little bit dismayed by the vitriol with which people are commenting, and to make it so personal in so many cases, and it is just dismaying. But of course, it was to be expected. once we tried to implicate gender
studies.
studies.
Did you realise that the label of transphobe, I think I've seen sexist as well, but was going to come at you quick and fast?
Sexist, yes. Transphobe, no. I was absolutely certain that people would, the usual suspects would, which, by the way, I don't know, we should consider those usual suspects largely gender scholars. They're primarily bloggers. And the blog universe has kind of gone on the warpath. And we did expect to be called hateful toward women in some regard, which is, of course, preposterous. I think it's rather funny, not to give it more publicity than it needs, but I did put it on Twitter so I can mention it, that it was written about in Salon that what we did is proof of a fear of powerful women, which is perhaps one of the funniest things I've ever read about myself. I mean, people trying to accuse us of being hasty in claiming proof of something that we didn't even claim, then going on and claiming that it proves one of the most preposterous and false things. Another fellow wrote a blog, and he's apologized since, so we're not gonna trash him
that's
for it.
Unheard of.
Yeah.
When does that happen? So the reason that
he accused us of being climate change deniers and far right lunatics, and so it's like, okay, go read some Twitter or something, because that's not quite right.
Okay, so I mean, the reason this label of sexist is coming towards you, because I believe you've used sort of the language of intersectional feminism in there, and I mean, I suppose that plays into the part of why it reads like satire quite a bit, but I assume that's why people are making the reach that it's sexist, because you're using similar language to papers that are considered legitimate in this field.
Sure. And the thing is that also, in addition to that, like we said, we don't know where the legitimacy is, but the radical constructivists have come to believe with religious fervor that the single best and probably only way to achieve social justice ends, which is, of course, a poisonous idea for social justice overall, is to accept completely uncritically the idea that their radical constructivist views are, the remedy for societal sin, like sexism. And so to question, to even tie something this high profile to the radical constructivist orthodoxy is to invite that very angry response, because these people genuinely want to be good people. In fact, it appears to be extremely important to them that they're very, very moral people. And so the fact is that they've seized, like religious people, upon a single morality or single moral system, and when that moral system, that's how they see themselves as good, that's how they see themselves as valuable, and in terms of psychosocial valuation of themselves and their peers. And so the second that orthodoxy is questioned, that moral orthodoxy is questioned, it draws into question their own identities. And so that's always, I mean, this is my research in psychology, and so this is always going to cause absolutely vicious demonizing responses in order to preserve one's identity. It's classic social identity theory, combined with a few other facets if you want a kind of more thoroughgoing explanation of it, but we don't need to get into that.
Okay, so no regrets. You're happy with the work you've done. It's certainly poked a wasp's nest, I would say. And
I decided it's a fire ant's nest, if you want a metaphor, just to be silly. We have fire ants here in the southeastern U.S., and if you see one of their mounds, it's fairly calm. If you bump into it or kick it or something, it leaps into furious action almost immediately with astonishing speed, just like with a wasp's nest. The difference is the behavior. Wasps, if you swat their nest, fly around and come after you. Hornets particularly would come after you, which are not wasps, of course. And then fire ants, on the other hand, some of them attack you, but other ones scurry around trying to already rebuild their defenses as fast as possible. You don't see them wasps trying to rebuild their nest in the moment. And then others start carrying around their little larvae, their pet ideas is the metaphor here, and protect those and carry those to a new place as fast as possible. So the metaphor is probably more accurately fire ants than a wasp. But yeah, certainly we have kicked the living crap out of one.
That's
and I think actually we kicked it somewhat, but the fact that Richard Dawkins immediately cheered it, that he's not real popular with some of these constructivist types, that I think probably has seemed to anger them quite a bit more. There's a whole cottage industry among them to discrediting Dawkins and attacking anything he says. And
I've seen a lot of that. It's bizarre as well because I've seen Dawkins tweet questionable things that I don't quite necessarily agree with, but the kind of reaching, like I'll retweet something that Dawkins has put out, and I'll get some sort of kickback that, why are you retweeting this racist misogynist? And it's the same process every time. I ask them if they've got any examples, and invariably it's the whole refrain of do your research, or Google it, and it's very strange that I'm very sometimes I suspect that people might be racist or misogynist, but I will never make that claim unless I can pin it down or make an example of it, because them terms to me are so important that we preserve their meaning, because the act of those things is so serious and horrible that we need to maintain the power of those words.
I completely agree with that.
Okay, so I suppose my last question would be, you say you have no regrets. Now that you've had a lot of feedback and a lot of criticism, besides maybe watering down some of the more creative flourishes in there, like you mentioned earlier, was there anything else you might change or tweak given a second attempt?
If we were going to actually try to get the thing published, and one of the main reasons why I did not want to engage in that attempt is when we were looking into some of the journals that are kind of higher up the pecking order, the majority of them have word limits, like minimum word limits, and I would have had to have made it twice as long to get it published. And I really didn't want to have to write twice as much baloney. So I guess if I were to repeat it, I'm not going to repeat it. I have no real interest. But if I were to try to get this paper published, go back to the last save point for our video gaming audience and try again, I would have had to have written it longer. I would have had to have made it slightly more serious. I would not have engaged in outright red flags, just, subtle red flags that would have carried a point. Naming one of our researchers Scammeron, like, hi, this is a scam or run, and then citing that, and then using false sources 5 out of 20 times or 5 out of 16 times originally. I don't think I would have done that if I wanted to get a proper so-called Sokal style hoax. And what I've said before is it's at a scale of 1 to 10 of over the top ridiculous. It's at 11, properly over the top. And I think we could have gotten it published in a more serious journal at probably an 8. Okay,
James. Well, thank you very much for coming on to speak to me. Fascinating learning about fire ants as well. I'll put that in my back pocket. But it's interesting what you've done. If anything, it's kicked up a big discussion about peer review and the field of gender studies. And I just hope that a lot of the sensible voices on this will get more attention than the hysterics from either side. Is there anything at all you wanted to get in or touch on before I let you get back to your day?
No, I guess one thing, if you want to ask if there are any proper regrets, the only thing I would mention, so everybody will be happy to hear this part that doesn't like us, but they won't like what I'm going to say, is that we made our piece in Skeptic too long, because a lot of the heat that we're getting seems to come down to a poor reading or an incomplete reading of what we wrote in Skeptic, where people have latched on to certain parts that infuriate them, largely that there are problems in gender studies. And this is a TLDR. Too long didn't read generation or whatever. And we wrote a 3,500 word piece in Skeptic. And so had we written 1,000 or 1,200 words, had we been able to take the time to craft that
140 characters, that's all you need nowadays.
Yes, if we would have written it in 140 characters or a 3-tweet storm, then perhaps it would have been more clear. But in reality, having written such a nuanced piece about such a controversial topic, maybe in the long run we'll be happy, but at the moment it's the cause of most of our headache. Okay, well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been great. Thank you for listening to the Godless Spell Checker podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please consider supporting by visiting gspellchecker.com/support. From here, you can either become a Patreon subscriber, or you can give a one-off donation through PayPal, or you can just follow some instructions on how best to share the podcast on social media, put it on a memory stick, throw it at people, whatever works best. Any support's greatly appreciated. I think we've all learned something here today.